Welcome, fellow Undead, to a deep exploration of one of Dark Souls' most fascinating and terrifying concepts, the Abyss. Tonight, we journey into the primordial darkness that lies at the heart of humanity itself, uncovering secrets that the gods would prefer remained hidden. Over the next few hours, we'll trace the origins of this ancient force, examine its manifestations throughout the kingdoms of Lordran and beyond, and discover why the Abyss represents both humanity's greatest threat and its ultimate destiny. The Abyss is not simply another enemy to be defeated or obstacle to overcome. It is the physical manifestation of humanity's true nature, a force so fundamental to existence that understanding it requires us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the Dark Souls universe. The darkness that spreads from places like Oolacile and New Londo is not an invasion from outside reality, but an eruption from within, a return of something that was always meant to be. To understand the Abyss, we must begin at the very beginning, in an age before light and dark held any meaning, in a world shrouded in eternal grey mist. In the beginning, there was only grey, a world wrapped in endless fog, where ancient stone trees stretched toward colourless skies, and everlasting dragons ruled over a realm without distinction, without change, without meaning. This was the Age of Ancients, a time before disparity itself existed in the world. The dragons of this primordial age were not creatures of flesh and blood as we understand them, but beings of immortal stone, their scales harder than any metal, their existence eternal and unchanging. They did not hunger, did not desire, did not struggle. They simply were, existing in perfect stasis atop their archthrees, watching over a world where nothing ever truly happened, because nothing could happen. There was no birth and no death, no heat and no cold, no light and no shadow. All things existed in a state of perfect equilibrium that was also perfect meaninglessness. This grey realm persisted for eons beyond counting, unchanging and eternal. The dragons had no concept that their world could be different because difference itself did not exist. There was no frame of reference by which to imagine change, no contrast to suggest that reality could be other than it was. The Age of Ancients was not paradise, for paradise implies the existence of suffering from which one has been freed. It was simply existence in its most fundamental, undifferentiated form. But deep beneath the surface of this grey world, in caverns that had never seen light because light did not yet exist, something was stirring. The first flame was awakening, and with it came the very concept of disparity. This was not merely fire in the conventional sense, but the fundamental force that would shatter the eternal grey and introduce the principles that would define all future existence. The appearance of the first flame was the most significant event in the history of the Dark Souls universe, more important than any battle, any kingdom's rise or fall, any individual's triumph or tragedy. In that moment when the flame first sparked into being, it created the very possibility of difference, and with difference came the potential for meaning, for choice, for story itself. From the flame emerged heat, and with heat came the concept of cold. Light burst forth, and suddenly shadow had meaning. Life became possible, which meant that death became inevitable. The most fundamental forces of existence split apart from their grey unity into opposing pairs, creating the tensions and conflicts that would drive all future history. But the first flame did more than simply introduce abstract concepts. It created power, concentrated and discrete, in the form of 4 great Lord Souls. These were not souls in the sense that living beings possessed them, but fundamental forces given conscious expression, pieces of creation itself that could be claimed and wielded by beings capable of understanding their significance. 4 entities emerged from the darkness of those deep places, drawn to the flame like moths to a bonfire, but these were no simple creatures. They were the first beings to possess true consciousness, the first to understand that they could grasp power and reshape reality according to their will. In the cavern where the first flame burned, they found the Lord Souls waiting, and each claimed one according to their nature. Gwyn, who would become the Lord of Sunlight, claimed the Light Soul, a fragment of the flame's own radiance concentrated into a form that could be controlled and directed. With this power, he would learn to command light itself, to create the very sun that would illuminate the world above. The Witch of Izalith took the life soul, embracing the creative and generative aspects of the flame's power. Through her, warmth and nurturing energy would flow, bringing forth new forms of existence and establishing the patterns by which life would propagate across the world. Nito, the first of the dead, claimed the death soul, accepting dominion over the end of all things. In a world that had known only eternal stasis, death was a revolutionary concept, the principle that would allow for change through the ending of old forms and the possibility of new beginnings. And then there was the fourth soul, the one that history would work so hard to forget. In the depths of that primordial cavern, a being known only as the Furtive Pygmy discovered the dark soul, a fragment of power unlike any of the others. Where the other Lord Souls blazed with obvious might, the dark soul was subtle, patient, almost invisible in its darkness. But appearances, as we shall see, can be profoundly deceiving. The gods like to present a particular narrative about this moment, one in which three great lords arose to challenge the dragons while a fourth, lesser being cowered in the shadows. But this interpretation reveals more about divine bias than historical truth. The pygmy was not hiding out of fear or weakness, but out of profound wisdom. They understood something that the other lords missed. That power which announces itself loudly burns out quickly, while power that waits patiently endures forever. With their lord souls in hand, Gwyn, the witch, and Nito waged war against the dragons. It was a conflict that would reshape the very nature of reality, introducing violence and struggle into a world that had known only peace through stagnation. Gwyn's lightning stripped away the dragon's immortal stone scales. The witch's flames scorched their bodies, and Nito's power of death ensured that what was destroyed would not simply return, unchanged. The war was long and terrible, but the dragon's very nature made them vulnerable to the new principles that the Lord's souls represented. Beings of eternal unchanging stone could not adapt to the sudden introduction of change itself. One by one, the great dragons fell, until only a scattered few remained, hidden in remote places. Their age of dominance ended forever. But while this dramatic war played out across the surface world, the Furtive Pygmy was engaged in a very different kind of project. The dark soul they had claimed possessed a unique property that none of the other Lord Souls shared. It could be divided, unlike Gwyn's light soul, or the witch's life soul, which were discrete and unified. The dark soul could be split into countless fragments without losing its essential nature. Each piece retained the full potential of the whole, like a flame that could light infinite candles without diminishing itself. The pygmy used this property to create humanity itself. They divided their soul into innumerable fragments, each one becoming a human being, each one carrying within them a piece of one of the four fundamental forces that shaped reality. This was an act of love and sacrifice beyond anything the other lords contemplated. Where Gwyn, the witch, and Nito hoarded their power and used it to elevate themselves above all other beings, the pygmy gave their power away, sharing it freely so that others might exist. But this gift came with profound implications that would echo across all the ages to come. Every human being, from the mightiest hero to the lowliest beggar, carries within them a fragment of a Lord soul. This makes humanity far more significant than their physical weakness might suggest. They are not lesser beings created to serve the gods, but inheritors of one of the primal forces that created the Age of Fire itself. This truth was so threatening to the established order that Gwyn felt compelled to erase all record of it. The opening cinematic of Dark Souls shows us three lords emerging from darkness to claim their souls, but deliberately obscures the fourth. We see a small figure reaching towards something in the flame, but their identity is left vague, almost forgettable. This is not an accident of storytelling, but the result of systematic historical revisionism designed to make humanity forget its true heritage. The Age of Ancients ended not with a single decisive battle, but with a gradual transformation as the principles introduced by the first flame spread throughout reality. The grey mist cleared, revealing a world of color and contrast. The stone trees gave way to living forests. The eternal dragons retreated to the fringes of existence, and the gods established their dominion over a reality defined by light, life, and the inevitability of death. But there was always a fourth principle, hidden in shadow, waiting patiently for its time to return. The dark soul had not been destroyed or diminished. It had merely been divided and concealed, scattered among billions of human souls, each one carrying the potential for the darkness to reassert itself when conditions were right. The gods had won their war and established their age, but the seeds of their eventual downfall had been planted in that same moment of victory, in the decision to allow humanity to exist at all. The dark soul represents one of the four fundamental forces that emerged from the first flame, yet it differs from its siblings in ways that make it uniquely dangerous to the established cosmic order, where Gwyn's light soul, the witch's life soul, and Nito's death soul are discrete powers wielded by singular beings. The dark soul exists in a state of intentional fragmentation, divided among countless humans yet retaining its fundamental unity and purpose. This fragmented nature is not a weakness, but the dark soul's greatest strength. A power concentrated in a single individual can be targeted, contained, or destroyed. But a power distributed across billions of separate consciousnesses becomes nearly impossible to eliminate without destroying humanity entirely. The Pygmies' decision to divide their soul was not an act of diminishment but a sophisticated strategy for ensuring that their power would endure long after the other Lord Souls had faded. Each human soul contains what the gods call humanity, but this term is deliberately vague, designed to obscure the truth of what humanity really is. It is not some abstract quality of compassion or creativity or moral worth. Humanity is literally fragments of the dark soul, pieces of one of the four primal forces that shaped existence itself. When a human collects and consumes humanity, they are not gathering some secondary resource but reuniting fragments of a Lord's soul, temporarily reversing the Pygmies' original division. This process of reunification explains many otherwise mysterious aspects of how humanity functions in the Dark Souls universe. When consumed, humanity restores not just physical vitality but aspects of consciousness and memory that have been eroded by the undead curse. It reverses hollowing because hollowing is itself a process designed to prevent humans from accessing the full power of their dark heritage. The curse strips away the accumulated humanity, keeping individuals weak and divided. Consuming humanity fights back against this artificial limitation. The physical appearance of humanity, when collected, is revealing. It manifests as a dark, writhing sprite, formless yet alive, shadows given almost substance. This is not corruption or decay but darkness in its pure, original state. The same darkness that existed before the first flame introduced disparity. When humans absorb these sprites, they are touching something older than light itself, experiencing a connection to the primordial unity that preceded the Age of Fire. The gods recognized the threat that humanity posed from the very beginning. Gwyn understood that humans who knew their true heritage would inevitably seek to reclaim their birthright, potentially bringing about the Age of Dark that he feared above all else. His solution was not to destroy humanity, which might have proven impossible given the distributed nature of the Dark Soul, but to ensure that humans remained ignorant of what they truly were. This campaign of suppression took many forms. Historical records were altered to minimize or erase the Pygmies' role in the war against the dragons. Religious doctrines were established that portrayed darkness as evil and light as good, creating moral frameworks that discouraged humans from exploring their own nature. Social structures were built that rewarded service to the gods, while punishing any displays of dark power or independent thoughts. But the most sophisticated and cruel aspect of this suppression appears to have been the creation of the Dark Sign and the Undead Curse, mechanisms that many scholars believe were specifically designed to prevent humans from accessing the full potential of their dark heritage. The exact origins and mechanisms of the curse remain debated, but its effects are undeniable. Despite these efforts at suppression, the fundamental nature of the Dark Soul ensures that its truth can never be completely hidden. Humanity continues to pulse within every human being, an inheritance that cannot be fully denied or destroyed. At moments of great stress or spiritual crisis, This dark nature can break through the barriers that normally contain it, manifesting as everything from simple magic to the reality-warping power of the abyss itself. The relationship between individual human souls and the larger dark soul they compose is complex and not fully understood even by those who study such matters most deeply. Each fragment retains some connection to the whole, like drops of water that remain fundamentally water even when separated from the ocean. This connection explains phenomena like the resonance between different humans, the way that accumulated humanity seems to call out to other sources of darkness, drawing them together. Some scholars theorize that the dark soul possesses a kind of distributed consciousness, that it remains aware and purposeful even in its fragmented state. Based on the seemingly coordinated nature of certain dark phenomena and the existence of beings like Darkstalker Kaith, who possess deep knowledge of humanity's true nature, this theory suggests that the individual humans might not consciously know they are part of this larger entity, but the entity itself knows them, guides them in subtle ways, works toward its own reunification through the actions of countless separate individuals who believe they are pursuing their own goals. This theory would explain the seemingly coordinated nature of certain dark phenomena, the way that abyssal corruption appears to follow strategies rather than simply spreading randomly. It would account for the existence of beings like Darkstalker Kaith, who seem to possess knowledge of humanity's true nature and work systematically to reveal it. Most troublingly, it suggests that every human is potentially an agent of the Dark Soul's will, whether they know it or not. The implications of this distributed consciousness are profound and disturbing. It means that humanity, as a collective, might have purposes and goals that transcend the intentions of any individual human. The desire for freedom from divine oppression that drives so much human behavior might not be merely a reaction to unjust conditions, but the expression of a cosmic will working through billions of separate voices to achieve a predetermined end. The gods' fear of humanity becomes more understandable in this light. They are not simply paranoid tyrants oppressing weaker beings for no reason. They are facing an existential threat from an enemy that cannot be easily confronted because it exists everywhere, hidden within the very beings they claim to protect and govern. Every human is a potential seed of the abyss, a fragment of the power that will eventually end the Age of Fire. Yet this same distributed nature also creates vulnerabilities for the dark soul. Fragmentation means diffusion of purpose and power. Individual humans can be manipulated, turned against one another, kept weak through division and conflict. The gods have proven remarkably effective at exploiting these vulnerabilities, using humanity's own ignorance of their nature as a weapon against them. The history of human civilization in the Dark Souls universe is largely a history of unknowing collaboration in one's own oppression. Humans build kingdoms that serve divine interests, practice religions that reinforce their own subjugation, internalize moral systems that make them ashamed of their true nature. They police one another, attacking those who display too much dark power or question divine authority too openly, doing the gods' work for them out of genuine belief that they are protecting civilization. Breaking free from this internalized oppression requires more than simply learning historical facts about the pygmy and the dark soul. It demands a fundamental reconceptualization of what it means to be human, a willingness to embrace aspects of one's nature that have been portrayed as evil or corrupt for as long as anyone can remember. This psychological barrier has proven far more effective at containing humanity than any physical restraint could be. Those rare individuals who do achieve this breakthrough in understanding face new challenges. Knowledge of one's dark heritage can be as dangerous as continued ignorance. Without wisdom and restraint, newly awakened humans can cause catastrophic damage to themselves and others. The story of Manus serves as the clearest example of this danger, demonstrating what happens when the full power of the dark soul manifests without the tempering influence of love and memory. Deep beneath the royal township of Oolacile, in chambers that predated the kingdom above by untold ages, there rested a grave. Ancient stones marked the site, their inscriptions long since worn away by time, their meaning forgotten by all who might have understood them. Within this tomb lay a being of such antiquity and power that their very existence had passed from history into myth, and from myth into complete obscurity. This was Manus, a primeval human from an age when the boundaries between humanity and divinity were not yet clearly drawn. Evidence suggests that Manus was not merely one of the Pygmy's early descendants, but possibly the Pygmy themselves, the original bearer of the Dark Soul, now resting in peaceful slumber after millennia of existence. The truth of this identity may never be fully known, but what is certain is that the being in that grave possessed a connection to the Dark Soul far deeper and more fundamental than any ordinary human. For countless ages, Manus slept undisturbed, dreaming perhaps of the Age of Ancients or the early days of fire, when all possibilities seemed open and the future remained unwritten. The slumber was not death, but a kind of hibernation, a chosen retreat from a world that had become strange and hostile to beings of such ancient origin. Within the grave, Manus remained suspended between existence and non-existence, neither truly alive nor fully dead. But Manus possessed something that anchored them to the waking world, prevented complete dissolution into the dark from which they had emerged. A pendant, simple and unremarkable to any casual observer, but precious beyond measure to its bearer. This small token represented memory, connection, love. It was a link to something or someone that had made existence meaningful for a being who had lived through ages beyond counting. The pendant's exact significance remains mysterious. Some scholars believe it was a gift from a lover, others suggest it contained a fragment of the first flame itself, preserved from the earliest days. What matters is not its physical nature but its psychological and spiritual importance. For Manus, this pendant was the last remaining connection to their humanity in the deepest sense. It kept the vast power of the Dark Soul within them, contained and controlled, prevented it from overwhelming the individual personality and consciousness that made them more than just a vessel of raw power. The tragedy that would transform Manus into the father of the abyss began not with malice, but with curiosity. The sorcerers of Oolacile, proud of their magical knowledge and always seeking to expand their understanding, began excavating the deep places beneath their city. They sought ancient wisdom, artifacts of power, anything that might increase their prestige and capability in the magical arts. These excavations were almost certainly not random exploration, but deliberate searches guided by outside influence. Darkstalker Cathy, the Primordial Serpent who opposed the Age of Fire, had been whispering to certain susceptible minds in Oolacile, filling them with visions of power and knowledge buried beneath their feet. The serpent spoke of primordial humans who predated the current age, of treasures of wisdom that could unlock the deepest mysteries of existence. To the sorcerers, who prided themselves on their rational approach to magic and their scholarly pursuit of truth, such promises were irresistible. They could not recognize that they were being manipulated by forces far beyond their comprehension, pieces being moved on a cosmic game board in service of agendas they could not imagine. When the sorcerers found Manus's grave, they saw only an archaeological curiosity, another artifact to be studied and catalogued. They could not comprehend what they had discovered, could not recognize the danger in disturbing the rest of such an ancient and powerful being. In their arrogance, they broke the seals, violated the tomb, and dragged forth the slumbering form within. And then they committed the act that would doom their entire kingdom. They took Manus's pendant. To the sorcerers, it was merely another object to be examined, its magical properties to be analyzed and understood. They had no way of knowing that they were stealing the last anchor keeping one of the most powerful beings in existence tethered to sanity and humanity. When Manus awakened to find themselves not only disturbed from peaceful rest, but robbed of the one thing that gave their long existence meaning, the response was catastrophic. The Dark Soul within Manus, no longer held in check by love and memory, exploded outward in a wave of pure dark power. The transformation was not merely one of scale but of fundamental being. The careful balance that had allowed Manus to exist as both human and bearer of tremendous power collapsed entirely. What remained was the Dark Soul in its raw, unrestrained state, magnified by aeons of accumulated existence, but stripped of the wisdom and compassion that had once guided its expression. Manus's physical form twisted and grew, becoming something between human and beast, standing perhaps 20 feet tall when upright. The body was covered in dark, matted fur, almost like shadow-given substance. The left arm swelled to grotesque proportions, the hand becoming a maw lined with teeth, capable of extending far beyond its apparent reach to seize prey. The right arm clutched a catalyst of dark sorcery, radiating power that could tear holes in reality itself. Most disturbing were the eyes. Manus's face became studded with glowing red orbs that seemed to see everything and nothing, gazing across time and space with an intelligence both profoundly human and utterly alien. These were not the eyes of a mindless beast, but of a consciousness so vast and wounded that it could no longer focus on any single point of existence. Manus retained human memories and emotions, but they were now magnified to cosmic proportions, transformed from personal feelings into reality-warping forces. The love that Manus had felt for whoever gave them the pendant became a desperate obsession spanning dimensions. The grief at its loss became a rage capable of tearing reality apart. The loneliness of aeons spent in slumber became a hunger that could never be satisfied. Every emotion that makes us human was still present in Manus, but operating at a scale that made them incomprehensible and terrifying. The chamber where Manus had slept became the epicenter of something unprecedented in the history of the world. A rupture in reality itself, where the fundamental nature of darkness began to reassert itself over the ordered world above. This was the birth of the Abyss as a physical location, a place where the Dark Soul's true nature could manifest without interference from the constraints that normally contained it. The Abyss that spread from Manus's awakening was unlike any darkness the world had seen before. It was not the simple absence of light or the threatening shadows of deep caves and dungeons. This was primordial darkness, the kind that existed before disparity itself, and it began to unmake the very foundations of reality wherever it touched. The citizens of Oolacile found themselves transformed in ways that stripped away everything civilization had built upon their human nature. The proud sorcerers became bloated, shambling monstrosities driven by base instincts and primitive fears. The conbars minced the tendalisation. The proud sorcerers became bloated, shambling monstrosities driven by base instincts and primitive fears. Sharitem their foes, Pevelsols, Pity, their grand township, built as a monument to knowledge and enlightenment, became a nightmare maze where former friends and neighbors hunted one another through twisted corridors. Princess Dusk, the most accomplished sorceress in all of Oolacile, found herself pulled into the Abyss itself, where Manus kept her prisoner. The father of the Abyss did not capture her out of malice, but out of desperate loneliness, seeing in her something that reminded him of what he had lost. In his madness, he could not distinguish between love and possession, between companionship and imprisonment. She became both captive and unwilling companion to a being whose capacity for love had become as terrifying as his capacity for destruction. The magic that Manus wields reflects the dual nature of his transformation. His sorceries are not merely destructive spells, but emotions given physical form. Dark Orb launches spheres of concentrated grief. Pursuers create seeking projectiles that embody obsessive love twisted into hatred. Dark Bead scatters fragments of rage across the battlefield. Each spell is an expression of feeling magnified beyond human scale, weaponized suffering that attacks both body and soul. The spell descriptions themselves hint at this emotional nature. Pursuers grants a fleeting will to the dark of humanity, and that will, we are told, feels envy or perhaps love, and despite the inevitably trite and tragic ending, the will sees no alternative and is driven madly toward its target. This is Manus's essence distilled into magic. Love so pure and desperate that it becomes indistinguishable from hatred, or so powerful that it transcends death itself. When combatants face these spells in battle, they are not just dodging magical attacks, but evading the concentrated emotional force of a being whose capacity for feeling has been magnified beyond mortal comprehension. Every near miss is a brush with cosmic loneliness, every hit a direct experience of grief that predates human civilization. The spread of the Abyss from Oolacile represented something new and terrifying to the divine order. Where previous dark phenomena had been contained, controllable, this was darkness that sought to return existence to the state that preceded the Age of Fire. It did not simply oppose light but threatened to dissolve the very concept of opposition, collapsing the disparity that made the current age possible. Manus himself became known as the father of the Abyss, not because he created it. The potential for the Abyss existed in the Dark Soul from the beginning, but because he was the first to manifest it fully in the physical world. He proved that the careful division of the Dark Soul among countless humans was not a permanent solution to the threat it posed, but merely a delay. Given the right circumstances, the power could be reunited and unleashed with world-ending consequences. The defeat of Manus, when it finally came, did not truly end the threat he represented. Destroying his physical form merely returned the Dark Soul to its fragmented state, scattered once again among humanity but not diminished in its essential power. The lessons learned from his manifestation would echo across all future ages. That the capacity for apocalyptic transformation exists within every human soul, waiting for the right combination of trauma and power to set it free. In Dark Souls 9, we see the continuation of this pattern as fragments of Manus's shattered soul take on independent existence, becoming the children of Dark. Nashandra, Ilana, Nadalia, and Alsana each represent different facets of the emotional complexity that made Manus both human and monstrous. His legacy lives on, scattered across time and space, each fragment carrying the potential to birth new abysses. The tragedy of Manus serves as the clearest possible demonstration of what happens when humanity's dark heritage is suppressed rather than integrated. The Pygmy had divided their soul and hidden among their descendants, living peacefully for ages beyond counting. It was only when this careful balance was violated, when Manus was forcibly awakened and then robbed of the emotional anchor that kept his power in check, that catastrophe occurred. The gods like to present this as evidence that humanity's dark nature must be controlled and contained. But the deeper truth is that the catastrophe was caused by the very systems of suppression and ignorance that the gods created. If Oolacile's sorcerers had understood what they were excavating, if they had recognized the significance of the pendant, if they had approached Manus with respect and wisdom rather than archaeological curiosity, the tragedy might have been avoided. Instead, their ignorance, carefully cultivated by centuries of divine propaganda about the evil of darkness, turned what could have been a peaceful awakening into the birth of the Abyss. Manus did not choose to become a monster. He was made into one by a combination of violation and loss that would have broken any being, no matter how powerful or ancient. While Oolacile's tragedy unfolded in the distant past, another kingdom was walking its own path toward abyssal corruption. New Londo stood as one of the great achievements of human civilization, a city specifically designed to accommodate the undead in an age when most kingdoms treated the cursed as plague victims to be exiled or destroyed. This progressive attitude made New Londo unique, a beacon of hope for those afflicted by the dark sign who sought acceptance and purpose, rather than isolation and despair. The city itself was a marvel of engineering and architecture, its great walls rising from marshlands to create a secure haven in a hostile world. Multiple districts housed different communities, from grand palaces to practical workshops, all connected by intricate systems of canals and bridges. The flood control mechanisms were particularly sophisticated, allowing the city to exist in harmony with the wetlands that surrounded it, while maintaining protection from both natural disasters and military threats. What made New Londo truly remarkable, however, was its governance. The four kings who ruled the city had achieved something rare in the Age of Fire, a genuinely functional human kingdom that served the needs of its people rather than primarily serving divine interests. Their wisdom and capability had drawn the attention of Gwyn himself, who bestowed upon them fragments of his own Lord's soul in recognition of their achievements. This was no small gesture. The Light Soul was the foundation of Gwyn's power, the source of his dominion over light and sun. Sharing even fragments of it represented enormous trust and respect. The four kings were elevated from mortal rulers to beings with genuine divine authority. Their power now derived from the very force that had shaped the Age of Fire. The four rulers, whose individual names have been lost to history, governed New Londo with exceptional skill. The city flourished under their guidance, becoming a center of culture, learning, and technological advancement. Its unique status as a haven for the undead allowed it to develop perspectives and capabilities that purely mortal kingdoms could not match. Citizens freed from the fear of death could take risks, pursue long-term projects, and develop expertise that would be impossible elsewhere. But New Londo's location and its extensive underground excavations brought it dangerously close to something lurking in the depths below, the abyss itself. The darkness born from Manus's awakening was not confined to Oolacile, but had begun spreading through the deep places of the world, following underground waterways and forgotten tunnels. It was in these depths that the four kings encountered Darkstalker Cathy. The Primordial Serpent did not approach them as an enemy seeking conquest, but as a teacher offering wisdom. He spoke eloquently of humanity's true nature, of the dark soul that pulsed within every human heart, of the power that could be theirs if they embraced their heritage rather than serving as agents of foreign gods. Most seductively, he taught them the art of life drain. Life drain represented something unprecedented in the established cosmic order. Where other forms of power required external sources, faith in gods, mastery of sorcery, or divine blessing, life drain drew its strength from the fundamental nature of humanity itself. By learning to manipulate the dark soul fragments within other beings, the four kings could absorb life force and make it their own. The appeal was obvious and multifaceted. A ruler who could sustain themselves through the essence of their subjects would never need to bow to foreign gods or negotiate for divine favor. They could become truly self-sufficient, answerable only to their own will and wisdom. From their perspective, this was not corruption but liberation, a way to free their kingdom from dependence on the gods, who looked down upon humanity as inferior beings. The four kings did not embrace life drain lightly or quickly. These were thoughtful leaders who genuinely believed they were making the best choice for their people. Cathy's arguments were compelling. Why should humanity serve gods who viewed them as lesser beings? Why should human leaders derive authority from sources that fundamentally misunderstood human nature? The serpent offered them a path to genuine independence and power rooted in their own heritage. The corruption that followed was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The four kings began using life drain sparingly, justifying it as a tool for maintaining order and protecting their city. They told themselves that drawing life force from criminals and traitors was not only acceptable but necessary for the greater good. They had not yet realized that the power they were wielding would ultimately transform them into something incompatible with human morality. As the rulers grew more comfortable with life drain, their perception of their subjects began to shift. Where once they had viewed the citizens of New Londo as people to be protected and served, they increasingly saw them as sources of power, to be managed and harvested. The fragments of Gwyn's light soul within them began to war with the growing darkness they were cultivating, creating internal conflict that would ultimately tear their identities apart. This transformation was mirrored by changes in their most loyal followers. The knights and guards who served the four kings were offered the same dark gifts, and many accepted eagerly. These warriors became the first Darkwraiths, humans who had fully embraced their connection to the abyss and gained terrible power in return. They wore armor that twisted and darkened to reflect their new nature, and they wielded weapons like the Dark Hand that could steal humanity with a touch. The Dark Hand itself deserves special attention as it represents the fundamental philosophy of the Darkwraiths made manifest. Where normal hands create, build, and comfort, the Dark Hand exists solely to take. It requires physical contact between drainer and drained, making the act of life theft intimate and personal. This closeness serves multiple purposes. It makes the draining deliberate rather than accidental. It prevents emotional distance from the act, and it reinforces the idea that humanity is meant to unite rather than remain divided. As abyssal influence spread through New Londo, the city itself began to change. The orderly districts became labyrinthine mazes where geography seemed to shift according to dark whims rather than architectural logic. The protective wards that had once kept the city safe now served to contain something far more dangerous, a growing pocket of absolute darkness that threatened to spill out into the wider world. The citizens found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their rulers' making. Those who resisted the new order were drained of their life force, while those who submitted found themselves gradually transformed into hollow shells. The city that had been a beacon of hope for the undead became a place where death was not an ending but the beginning of something far worse. The four kings themselves underwent the most dramatic transformation. The fragments of Gwyn's light soul within them became corrupted by their growing connection to the abyss, creating beings that were neither fully human nor entirely dark. Their physical forms stretched and distorted, becoming wraith-like entities wrapped in tattered robes and wielding massive swords that seemed to drink light itself. They were no longer four distinct individuals, but four aspects of a single dark will, unified in their hunger and their purpose. The threat that New Londo posed to the wider world was unprecedented. Unlike other dark forces that could be fought with conventional means, the Darkwraiths possessed the ability to spread their corruption simply through existence. Their red-eye orbs allowed them to invade other realms, seeking out sources of humanity to fuel their masters' ever-growing hunger. Each successful raid brought more power to the four kings and created new converts to their cause. Gwyn and his followers initially attempted to contain the situation through conventional military action. Knight Artorias, known for his previous battles against dark forces, was dispatched with orders to contain the spreading darkness. Artorias possessed the Covenant of Artorias, a ring that allowed him to traverse the abyss without being consumed, and he wielded weapons blessed by the gods themselves. Artorias' mission to New Londo, and later to Oolacile, demonstrated both his legendary skill and the ultimate inadequacy of martial prowess against the abyss. While he achieved some success in combating the Darkwraiths, the deeper threat posed by abyssal corruption proved beyond any single warrior's ability to permanently contain. The turning point came when it became clear that New Londo could not be saved through heroic intervention alone. The abyss had taken root too deeply, and the four kings had grown too powerful. The decision to flood New Londo was made by the sealers themselves, three powerful sorcerers and healers who served the city. It was an agonizing choice. If the city could not be redeemed, it would have to be destroyed, along with everyone and everything within it. The flooding required these sealers to act with terrible swiftness. Chief among them was Ingward, who along with Yulva and a third unnamed mage, understood the full horror of what they were about to do. Flooding the city would not only kill its remaining innocent inhabitants, but would trap the Darkwraiths and the four kings in a watery prison for all eternity. These were healers, individuals dedicated to curing the sick and helping their countrymen, now forced to become executioners. The moral calculus was stark. Sacrifice one city to save the world. The abyss taking root in New Londo was growing stronger with each passing day, and the Darkwraiths were spreading its influence to other kingdoms. If the corruption could not be stopped, the sealers reasoned, it would eventually consume everything, bringing about the age of dark centuries before the natural end of the fire. The risk of the Darkwraiths escaping, if they attempted to evacuate the city, seemed too great. They had to act quickly and ruthlessly. When the flood came, it was both salvation and damnation. The rushing waters filled every corridor and chamber of New Londo, drowning Darkwraiths and their victims alike. The four kings found themselves trapped in the deepest chambers of their city, surrounded by the very element that had once brought life to their realm, but now served as their eternal prison. But death by drowning was not the end for the citizens of New Londo. The same curse that had made them welcome in the city as undead now prevented them from finding peace in death. They rose as ghosts, spectral beings trapped between life and death, forever wandering the flooded ruins of their home. These spirits retained enough of their former selves to feel grief and rage, but lacked the power to change their circumstances or find release. The four kings, possessing fragments of a Lord's soul, proved even more resistant to destruction. The flood contained them but could not destroy them, leaving them to brood in the abyss that had been their downfall. Over the centuries, they grew stronger rather than weaker, feeding on the dark energies that flowed through their prison and preparing for the day when someone would come to challenge them. The tragedy of New Londo serves as a perfect example of how the abyss corrupts not through overwhelming force but through the promise of power and the gradual erosion of moral boundaries. The four kings did not wake up one day and decide to become monsters. They made a series of increasingly compromising choices, each one justified by the last, until they found themselves transformed into something they would once have fought to destroy. The lesson extends beyond the personal to the political. New Londo's fall demonstrates how entire societies can be corrupted when their leaders lose sight of the values that gave them legitimacy in the first place. The city, built on the principle of accepting the outcast, became a place where humanity itself was treated as a resource to be consumed. The flooding also represents the lengths to which the established order will go to preserve itself. Rather than address the underlying issues, the treatment of humanity, the artificial extension of the Age of Fire, the suppression of humanity's true nature, Gwyn's forces chose to treat the symptoms with overwhelming violence. This pattern would repeat throughout the Dark Souls series. Whenever the Abyss manifests, the response is always destruction rather than understanding, containment rather than integration. In the pantheon of Dark Souls heroes, few figures command as much respect and tragic sympathy as Knight Artorias the Abyss Walker. His legend speaks of a warrior of unmatched skill and unshakable resolve, one of the 4 greatest knights to serve Lord Gwyn during the height of the Age of Fire. Yet the true story of Artorias is not one of triumph but of noble failure, of a hero whose very virtues became the instruments of his downfall. Artorias represented the pinnacle of what a knight could become in service to the gods. Tall and imposing even among his legendary peers, he wielded a greatsword with such skill that it seemed an extension of his own will. His armor bore the mark of his covenant with the Abyss Watchers, great wolves who had agreed to aid humanity in its darkest hour. Most importantly, he possessed the ability to traverse the abyss itself without being consumed by its darkness. This remarkable resistance came from the Covenant of Artorias, a ring forged specifically for this purpose. The ring created a barrier of light around its wearer, allowing them to walk through the deepest abyssal realms as easily as they might stroll through a sunlit meadow. Although unsproos with this, hosts to beware, hella for all over the abyss. Alone zest, hope sprow through a sunlit meadow. Also no new, hello word US, of a new war, on a bro payas, a Ryan you, with this protection and his legendary skill, Artorias had successfully cleansed the abyss from New Londo, establishing himself as the preeminent expert on combating abyssal corruption. When reports reached Londo of a new outbreak in the distant kingdom of Oolacile, there was never any question of who would be sent to deal with it. Artorias had proven himself against the darkness before, and his combination of skill, protection, and experience made him the obvious choice for what appeared to be a familiar problem requiring a familiar solution. But Oolacile presented challenges that New Londo had not. Where the corruption of New Londo had been primarily political, kings and knights choosing to embrace dark power, the situation in Oolacile was far more complex. An entire kingdom had been transformed not through ambition, but through curiosity, their desire to understand the mysterious rather than simply destroy it. The sorcerers of Oolacile had awakened Manus himself, disturbing the slumber of a being whose connection to the dark soul was so fundamental that his awakening tore a hole in reality. When Artorias arrived, he found not a collection of corrupted humans who had chosen darkness but a primordial force that existed beyond choice, beyond morality, beyond anything his training had prepared him to face. Artorias' initial approach followed strategies that had served him well before. He began by attempting to rescue the innocent, focusing particularly on Princess Dusk, whose magical abilities might prove crucial in reversing the corruption. He worked his way through the transformed township, his blessed sword cutting through creatures that had once been citizens, always moving deeper toward the source of the darkness. But as Artorias pressed further into the corrupted kingdom, he began to encounter something his previous experiences had not prepared him for: the abyss's ability to corrupt not through temptation but through simple exposure. The darkness flowing from Manus was not offering power or trying to seduce the knight with promises. Instead, it was slowly eroding the barriers that separated Artorias from his own dark heritage. The Covenant of Artorias, for all its protective power, was designed to shield its wearer from the abyss's ability to unmake beings of light. It was not intended to protect against the more subtle process, by which prolonged exposure to concentrated darkness could awaken the dormant dark soul fragment within every human, including Artorias himself. As the knight fought deeper into Oolacile, he began to experience flashes of insight that had nothing to do with tactical assessment. He started to understand, on a level deeper than conscious thought, what the abyss truly represented: It was not an alien force invading the world, but humanity's own nature, finally freed from constraints. This realization was profoundly disturbing to a knight whose entire identity was built around service to the gods. Artorias had dedicated his life to fighting darkness in all its forms, only to discover that the darkness he battled was an inseparable part of what he was sworn to protect. Every human he had saved carried within them the potential to become another Manus, another source of abyssal corruption. The philosophical crisis was compounded by practical challenges. The deeper Artorias ventured into the abyss beneath Oolacile, the more he found his usual tactics failing. His sword, blessed by the gods themselves, seemed to have less effect on creatures spawned by Manus's will. The light that should have driven back darkness instead seemed to make it more aggressive, more aware of his presence. Most troubling, Artorias began to realize that his mission might be fundamentally impossible. Manus was not a symptom of corruption that could be cured by removing a few bad actors, but the return of something that had always existed at the heart of human nature. Fighting him was like trying to battle the tide or halt the turning of seasons, a struggle against natural forces far too vast to be overcome by individual will, no matter how strong. The breaking point came when Artorias finally confronted Manus, directly in the chasm of the abyss. The battle was unlike anything the knight had experienced. Where his previous opponents had been beings he could understand and counter, Manus represented pure emotional force given physical form. Every attack carried the weight of cosmic grief, primordial rage, and love so pure that it had become indistinguishable from hatred. Artorias fought valiantly, but he was not merely facing a powerful enemy. He was confronting the truth of what he himself could become. In Manus's twisted form, he saw the potential endpoint of every human soul, the destiny that awaited all humanity when the Age of Fire finally ended and the Dark Soul reclaimed its dominance. The knight's defeat was as much psychological as physical. His left arm was shattered by one of Manus's devastating attacks, leaving him unable to wield the great shield that had protected him in countless battles. But more significantly, his faith in the righteousness of his cause was broken by the revelation that he was fighting not evil but evolution, not corruption but inevitable change. In his final moments of clarity, Artorias made a choice that would define his legacy. Rather than allowing himself to be consumed by despair, he chose to save the one companion who had remained loyal throughout his ordeal, the great wolf Sif, who had followed him into darkness despite the danger. Using his own great shield, Artorias created a barrier of light around the young wolf, protecting Sif from the humanity sprites that swarmed through the deepest parts of the abyss. This act of selfless love, performed even as his own sanity crumbled, represented everything noble about the knight's character. He could not save the kingdom, could not complete his mission, could not even save himself. But he could ensure that one innocent life would survive to remember what he had tried to accomplish. With Sif protected, Artorias succumbed to the abyss's influence, but his corruption took a unique form. Where others who fell to abyssal influence became servants of darkness, Artorias became something more complex, a corrupted knight who retained his sense of duty, even as his understanding of that duty became twisted beyond recognition. The corrupted Artorias continued to patrol the abyss beneath Oolacile, hunting down anything that threatened what he perceived as the new order. In his madness, he had come to see the abyss, not as the enemy he had been sent to fight, but as the true future of the world, something to be protected against the dying gasps of the Age of Fire. This transformation was perhaps the most tragic aspect of Artorias's fall. He had not become evil in any conventional sense. He was still driven by the same desire to protect and serve that had defined his entire career. The difference was that his perception of what needed protection had been fundamentally altered by his exposure to the truth of human nature. When the chosen undead eventually encounters the corrupted Artorias, the battle that ensues is not a simple confrontation between good and evil, but a mercy killing of a hero who has been broken by knowledge he was never meant to possess. Every attack Artorias makes is technically aimed at protecting the abyss from what he perceives as an invader, making him simultaneously tragic and dangerous. The defeat of Artorias serves multiple symbolic purposes. It represents the passing of the torch from the old guard of heroes who served the gods to a new generation who must find their own path. It demonstrates that even the greatest servants of divine order are vulnerable to the truth of humanity's dark heritage. Most importantly, it serves as a warning about the dangers of absolute loyalty to any ideology. Artorias' unwavering dedication to serving the gods prevented him from adapting when he encountered evidence that challenged his worldview. Rather than questioning whether his mission was still valid in light of new information, he chose to let his mind break rather than his faith. This inflexibility, presented as a virtue in divine service, became the mechanism of his destruction. The legacy of Artorias extends beyond his personal tragedy. In Dark Souls III, we encounter the Abyss Watchers, an entire legion of knights who have taken on his mantle and dedicated themselves to preventing the spread of abyssal corruption. But even they are ultimately consumed by the very darkness they sought to fight, demonstrating that Artorias' fate was not an isolated incident, but a predictable outcome of attempting to oppose humanity's fundamental nature. Among all servants of the Abyss, none are as intimately connected to humanity's dark heritage as the Darkwraiths. These fallen knights represent not corruption in the traditional sense but evolution, the natural progression of humans who have fully embraced their connection to the dark soul and learned to wield its power without restraint or moral limitation. Before their fall, the Darkwraiths were knights and guards of New Londo, sworn to protect the city and serve its rulers with honor. They were not monsters or criminals but ordinary humans who had dedicated their lives to ideals of service and protection. When the four kings began their tutelage under Darkstalker Kath, learning the forbidden art of life drain, their most loyal followers were naturally among the first to be offered a share in their master's new power. The gift was presented not as corruption but as evolution, a chance to transcend the limitations that had been artificially imposed upon human nature by divine decree. Life Drain itself operates by manipulating the dark soul fragments that exist within every human being, drawing them out and integrating them into the wielder's own spiritual essence. This process is not merely theft but a kind of spiritual cannibalism, one human consuming the fundamental nature of another to enhance their own power. The victim does not simply die but is diminished in a way that goes beyond physical death, their very humanity extracted and repurposed. What remains is often a hollow shell, emptied of the spark that made them complete. Yet from the Darkwraith's perspective, this ability represents something far more significant than personal empowerment. Life Drain is proof that humans need not remain divided and weak, that the fragmentation of the dark soul can be reversed through conscious effort. Each act of draining brings the wielder closer to the unified power that their ancestors possessed before the pygmy chose to divide their soul among countless offspring. The transformation of knights into Darkwraiths was gradual, designed to ease them into the mindset without overwhelming them with the full implications of their choice. Initially, they used Life Drain only against enemies of the state, allowing them to rationalize their first uses as responses to legitimate threats. As their power grew and understanding deepened, they were gradually exposed to the broader philosophical framework that justified more aggressive applications. The physical transformation that accompanied their spiritual evolution reflected this change in purpose. Their armor darkened and twisted, taking on an almost skeletal appearance that emphasized death rather than protection. Their weapons became infused with dark energy, gaining the ability to drain life even in conventional combat. Most significantly, they were granted the Dark Hand. The Dark Hand represents the ultimate expression of Darkwraith philosophy. Unlike a sword which creates distance between attacker and victim, the Dark Hand requires physical contact and intimate connection between drainer and drained. This closeness serves multiple purposes. It makes the act deliberate, prevents emotional distance, and reinforces the idea that humanity is meant to be united rather than divided. The weapon's appearance, a hand surrounded by writhing darkness, serves as a perfect metaphor for the Darkwraith's transformation. Where normal hands create and comfort, the Dark Hand exists only to take. It represents the fundamental perversion that occurs when the drive to unite with others becomes a compulsion to consume them. But the Darkwraiths do not see their transformation as perversion. From their perspective, they have simply acknowledged what humans truly are beneath the veneer of civilization. They argue that cooperative instincts characterizing normal society are artificial constructs imposed by gods who feared humanity's true potential. The Darkwraiths believe they have stripped away false limitations to reveal the hunger that drives all existence. This philosophical justification becomes more complex when we consider the Darkwraiths' relationship with their undead nature. Unlike other humans who view the curse as a burden, Darkwraiths see it as liberation. Death and rebirth become meaningless when one's purpose transcends individual survival. They are freed from the fear that constrains mortal behavior, able to pursue their goals with single-minded determination. The red-eye orbs that allow Darkwraiths to invade other worlds serve as both weapon and recruitment tool. Each successful invasion brings new humanity to the collective pool, while demonstrating the power awaiting those willing to embrace their dark heritage. The invaded are not just victims but potential converts, shown through direct experience what humans can become when they stop accepting artificial limitations. The selection of invasion targets follows logic reflecting the Darkwraiths' understanding of their mission. They seek out humans showing signs of spiritual strength, undead who have accumulated significant humanity, heroes proven in combat, individuals whose life force would provide substantial nourishment for the growing darkness. They conduct a form of natural selection, identifying the strongest members of humanity and either converting or consuming them. This selective predation serves Cathy's larger goals for humanity's future. The Primordial Serpent does not simply want to return the world to darkness, but to create a specific kind of dark age, one ruled by humans who have fully embraced their heritage and gained power to enforce their will upon reality itself. The Darkwraiths serve as both agents of this transformation and living proof that such evolution is possible. The covenant binding Darkwraiths to Caith is unlike other allegiances in Dark Souls. It is not based on worship or service, but on mutual benefit and shared understanding. Cathy provides knowledge and purpose, while Darkwraiths provide means to implement his vision. The relationship is collaborative rather than hierarchical, reflecting the democratic ideals that will supposedly characterize the coming age of Dark. This egalitarian approach extends to the Darkwraiths' internal organization. Unlike traditional knightly orders with rigid hierarchies, they operate as a loose confederation united by common purpose rather than formal authority. Each member is free to pursue humanity collection through whatever means they find most effective, leading to diversity of approaches and tactics. Some Darkwraiths prefer direct confrontation, using enhanced physical abilities and dark weapons to overpower targets through superior force. Others favor stealth and ambush, using their ability to invade other worlds to appear without warning. Still others employ psychological warfare, using their reputation and the fear it generates to weaken opponents before battle begins. The variety of Darkwraith tactics reflects the broader truth that embracing one's dark heritage does not create uniformity, but reveals the full spectrum of human potential. Where divine service tends to homogenize followers around specific virtues, the path of darkness encourages expression of individual nature in all its forms. The ultimate goal extends beyond simple accumulation of humanity. They seek to gather enough dark power to fuel the ascension of a Dark Lord, a human who has absorbed sufficient quantities of the Dark Soul to rival the gods themselves. This Dark Lord would serve as both symbol and catalyst for humanity's transition to its rightful place as the dominant force in existence. The process requires not just quantity but quality of humanity. The candidate must be someone capable of integrating vast amounts of dark power without losing their essential identity. They must possess wisdom to use that power constructively rather than destructively, and will to resist temptations that come with godlike abilities. From the Darkwraith's perspective, their invasions and humanity theft serve this greater purpose. They are not simply feeding their own power, but contributing to a collective effort that will eventually benefit all humanity. Each successful draining brings the community closer to achieving the critical mass necessary for transformation. This utilitarian justification reflects the complex moral universe of Dark Souls, where traditional concepts of good and evil prove inadequate. The Darkwraiths genuinely believe they are working toward a better future for humanity, even as their methods involve systematic destruction of individual humans who oppose or obstruct their goals. The tragedy of the Darkwraiths lies not in their corruption, but in their sincerity. Unlike many Dark Souls villains driven by petty ambition, the Darkwraiths genuinely believe they serve humanity's best interests. Their willingness to sacrifice individual lives for collective good reflects a utilitarian philosophy that, while morally questionable, is internally consistent and logically defensible. This sincerity makes them far more dangerous than conventional enemies. A villain motivated by greed can potentially be reasoned with or redirected. But Darkwraiths cannot be dissuaded because they view their path as not just desirable but necessary. They have seen the truth of humanity's dark heritage and cannot unsee it, cannot return to comfortable illusions that allow normal humans to function in the Age of Fire. The equipment and techniques favored by Darkwraiths reflect their unique position as humans who have transcended traditional moral constraints. Their armor, weapons, and spells all emphasize manipulation and absorption of humanity, turning what should be protective tools into instruments of spiritual predation. The dark sword wielded by many exemplifies this philosophy. Unlike blessed weapons deriving power from divine favor, the dark sword feeds on the life force of those it cuts. Each successful attack makes the weapon stronger while weakening the defender, creating a feedback loop that rewards aggression and punishes mercy. The dark sorceries employed by Darkwraiths operate on principles that invert traditional magical theory. Where normal sorcery seeks to impose order on chaotic forces, dark magic embraces and amplifies that chaos. Spells like Dark Orb and Pursuers don't simply project destructive energy, but actively seek out and consume the life force of their targets. This embrace of chaos and consumption extends to the Darkwraiths' understanding of their own mortality. Where other undead view their curse as a burden preventing them from finding peace, Darkwraiths see undeath as liberation from fear that constrains mortal behavior. They can pursue their goals with complete dedication because they have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Among all mechanisms by which the gods sought to control humanity's destiny, none has proven as pervasive or psychologically devastating as the curse of the undead. This affliction, marked by the appearance of the dark sign upon those who lose their sense of purpose, represents the most sophisticated form of spiritual containment ever devised. The dark sign itself appears as a ring of fire branded into the flesh of those marked by the curse. This symbol is rich with meaning, representing the literal containment of humanity's dark heritage within a circle of divine flame. The fire forming the ring is not merely symbolic but functional, serving as a spiritual barrier preventing the dark soul fragment within each human from achieving its natural expression. To understand the true horror of the undead curse, one must recognize that it transforms what should be humanity's greatest strength, their immortal spiritual nature, into a source of endless suffering. Humans were meant to be undying beings whose consciousness would persist and evolve across vast spans of time. The curse corrupts this immortality, creating a state where death becomes impossible, but meaningful existence becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. The curse operates through a mechanism that might be called spiritual lobotomy. When a human begins to lose their sense of purpose or question the meaning of their existence, natural and healthy responses to the artificial constraints of divine civilization, the dark sign activates, burning away aspects of their consciousness that the gods consider dangerous. Memory, emotion, creativity, and independent thought are all vulnerable to this process, leaving behind hollow shells that retain basic functionality but lack the spark that makes existence meaningful. This hollowing serves multiple purposes within the divine order. Most obviously, it prevents humans from developing the existential clarity that might lead them to reject divine authority. More insidiously, the curse creates a vast population of spiritually damaged humans who can be exploited as a labor force for projects serving divine interests. Hollow undead retain enough cognitive function to perform simple tasks, but lack the motivation or creativity to question orders or seek alternatives. They make ideal soldiers, workers, and servants for a cosmic order depending on unquestioning obedience. The renewable nature of the curse provides the gods with an endless supply of this exploitable labor. When undead are destroyed in service to divine purposes, They simply return to life at designated points called bonfires, their memories and personalities further eroded by the process. Each death and rebirth brings them closer to complete hollowing, while ensuring their spiritual essence remains available for continued exploitation. The bonfires themselves represent one of the most elegantly cruel aspects of the entire system. These focal points appear to offer sanctuary and hope, providing warmth, rest, and the ability to restore lost vitality. In reality, they serve as collection points where the spiritual energy of dying undead can be harvested and redirected toward maintaining the first flame that sustains divine power. The process by which undead lose their collected souls and humanity upon death is not accidental, but carefully designed to prevent them from accumulating enough spiritual power to break free from the curse's constraints. Each death strips away progress toward enlightenment, ensuring undead remain trapped in cycles of futile struggle, serving divine purposes rather than their own development. The humanity that undead can collect and consume serves as both carrot and stick within this system. Small amounts can temporarily restore aspects of consciousness and memory eroded by the curse, providing enough relief to maintain hope and motivation. But the humanity is always temporary, always insufficient to provide lasting freedom, creating a cycle of dependency that parallels addiction. The source of this consumable humanity reveals another layer of sophistication. Much comes from other humans, either those who have died and left their spiritual essence behind, or those deliberately killed and harvested. The curse thus creates not just individual suffering but social pathology, encouraging humans to prey upon one another rather than recognizing their common situation and joining forces against true oppressors. The Estus Flask system provides perhaps the clearest example of how the curse transforms genuine spiritual sustenance into a mechanism of control. The golden liquid these flasks contain is indeed capable of healing both physical and spiritual wounds, but it must be constantly renewed at bonfires serving divine purposes. The undead become dependent on a healing system, requiring them to remain within geographic and spiritual territory controlled by their oppressors. The firekeepers who tend the bonfires represent the human face of this system of spiritual exploitation. These women have been chosen for their sensitivity to spiritual energies and their willingness to sacrifice their own development in service to others. They genuinely believe they are helping the undead who visit their bonfires, unaware they are actually facilitating a harvesting operation, keeping those same undead trapped in cycles of suffering. The physical and psychological effects of the firekeeper role, their blindness, isolation, and gradual loss of normal human emotions, reflect the corrupting influence of their participation in the curse system. They become living examples of what happens to humans who fully embrace their assigned roles within divine order, maintaining functionality while losing essential qualities that make existence worthwhile. The variation in how different individuals respond to the undead curse reveals important truths about human spiritual development and resistance to oppression. Some undead hollow quickly, losing their sense of self within days or weeks of being marked. Others maintain consciousness and purpose for decades or centuries, finding ways to resist the curse's erosive effects through force of will or spiritual practice. This variation is not random but reflects the depth and authenticity of the individual's connection to their own dark heritage. Those who have always defined themselves primarily through external validation and social approval tend to hollow quickly when those sources of meaning are stripped away. Those who have developed internal sources of purpose and identity prove more resistant to the curse's psychological assault. The most dangerous undead from the gods' perspective are those who use their cursed state as an opportunity for spiritual development rather than simply enduring it as an affliction. These individuals recognize that their immortality, despite its corrupted form, provides unlimited time to explore the depths of their own nature and develop capacities impossible for normal mortals. These spiritually advanced undead often become the protagonists of cosmic drama unfolding throughout the Dark Souls series. Their resistance to complete hollowing makes them suitable candidates for challenging quests, determining the fate of entire ages. Whether they choose to serve the flame or embrace darkness, their persistence in the face of the curse marks them as exceptional beings worthy of cosmic attention. As the Age of Fire drew toward its twilight in lands far beyond Lordran, the nature of darkness itself continued to evolve across the cycles. In the Cathedral of the Deep, located in the kingdom that would come to house the Shrine of Firelink, a different manifestation of corrupted darkness emerged, one that scholars would come to call the Deep. The Deep represents what happens when humanity and dark souls stagnate rather than flow naturally. According to the archdeacons who studied it, the Deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, described in their miracles as pure before it became the final resting place for many abhorrent things. But what exactly caused this transformation remains a subject of debate among those who study the darker aspects of Dark Souls lore. Human dregs, described as the heaviest things within the human body, play a central role in understanding the Deep. These dregs are essentially stagnated fragments of humanity and dark souls that sink to the lowest depths imaginable. Unlike the active, flowing darkness of the abyss, which seeks to spread and transform, the dregs of the Deep represent darkness that has settled, fermented, and corrupted through prolonged stagnation. The Cathedral of the Deep itself was originally established as a sacred site, possibly built atop or near what was once considered a peaceful body of water used for spiritual purification. The clerics and deacons who tended this place were tasked with containing the horrors that arose from the Deep, though over time, many would succumb to the very darkness they sought to seal away. Central to the Deep's corruption was Aldrich, a cleric who experienced visions of a deep sea and of an age where dregs of humanity would sink to form the foundation of a new world. These visions drove him to practice cannibalism, devouring not just the flesh but the very souls of humans. Through this act, Aldrich accumulated vast amounts of stagnant darkness within his body, which fermented and degenerated into deep darkness that spread into the cathedral's waters. The distinction between the Deep and the abyss is subtle but significant. Where the abyss represents raw, primordial darkness erupting forth with terrible vitality, often linked to humanity going wild as with Manus, the Deep represents darkness that is stagnated, accumulated, and festered over time. Both are corruptions of humanity's dark heritage, but they manifest through different processes. Archdeacon MacDonald, sent from the Boreal Valley to aid the cathedral's deacons, found himself fascinated by the stagnant souls he discovered there. Rather than being repelled, he delighted in them, believing he had found the bottom of the world. MacDonald created sorceries that manipulated dark soul dregs, teaching these forbidden arts to other deacons, including Archdeacon Royce. Over time, the deacons themselves began to succumb to the Deep's influence. Despite their faith and their tending of holy flames, they could not resist the seductive power of this stagnated darkness. They began incorporating tales of the Deep into their sacred scriptures, corrupting holy texts with profane knowledge. Their clerical garb darkened, their candlesticks became sorcery catalysts, and they transformed from servants of light into practitioners of dark magic. The corruption spread beyond the deacons to the very structure of the cathedral. Graves began to stir as corpses dragged themselves from dark fog, many of them puppeteered by masses of maggots that had spontaneously generated from the Deep's influence. The sacred waters that had once been used for purification became infected with festering darkness. The first signs of the Deep's malevolent evolution appeared in communities most enthusiastic about dreg extraction. People began reporting strange dreams, compulsive behaviors, and increasing obsession with water and drowning. The purified humans who had undergone the process started showing signs of deterioration, not physical but spiritual. They retained freedom from base urges but lost capacity for joy, love, and creative inspiration. More disturbing still were changes in the extracted dregs themselves. What had once been inert pools of dark essence began showing signs of movement and purpose. Tentacles emerged from the depths, reaching toward the surface world with obvious hunger. The chambers containing the dregs became increasingly dangerous, requiring ever more elaborate protective measures to prevent contamination of areas above. The church authorities initially tried to contain these developments through traditional means. More powerful seals, stronger barriers, increased vigilance from specially trained clergy. But they failed to understand they were not dealing with a static problem that could be solved through better engineering, but with a dynamic force, actively adapting and evolving in response to their countermeasures. The Deep's intelligence manifested most clearly in its recruitment strategies. Rather than simply overwhelming defenses through brute force, it began to seduce new practitioners with visions of spiritual advancement and divine favor. It presented itself not as corruption but as revelation, offering insights into the true nature of existence that could only be achieved through deeper communion with darkness. These visions were sophisticated and compelling, tailored to the specific psychological needs and intellectual interests of their targets. Scholars were offered hidden knowledge, mystics were promised direct communion with cosmic forces, and leaders were shown visions of peace and order that could be achieved through proper management of human nature. The corruption spread through church hierarchies with remarkable speed once it began, facilitated by existing power structures and communication networks the institution had developed for other purposes. Bishops and archbishops who fell under the Deep's influence used their authority to promote its practices, presenting new rituals as natural extensions of existing doctrine rather than fundamental departures from church teaching. This institutional capture was perhaps the Deep's greatest strategic victory. By working through established religious authority rather than opposing it directly, the Deep was able to present its corruption as orthodox development rather than heretical innovation. Faithful church members found themselves participating in increasingly dark rituals without fully understanding how far they had departed from their original beliefs. The transformation of entire church communities under Deep influence followed a predictable pattern. Initial stages involved subtle changes in doctrine and practice, shifts that seemed reasonable and even beneficial to most participants. The emphasis gradually moved from service to others toward service to deeper mysteries, from community welfare toward individual spiritual advancement. As corruption deepened, more obvious changes became apparent. Church art began featuring aquatic themes and drowning imagery. Sermons increasingly focused on benefits of surrender and submission to forces beyond human understanding. The architecture itself began to change, with new construction emphasizing downward movement toward deep chambers rather than upward aspiration toward light. The final stages of Deep corruption were unmistakably malevolent. Practitioners began losing their human appearance, developing aquatic characteristics and demonstrating behaviors that were clearly predatory rather than pastoral. The communities they served found themselves trapped in cycles of ritual sacrifice and spiritual parasitism, their humanity being systematically harvested to feed the growing power of the Deep. Yet even at this stage, many participants continued to believe they were serving a higher purpose. The Deep's manipulation was so sophisticated that it could maintain the illusion of spiritual advancement, even as it drained its followers of everything that made them truly human. This self-deception was perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Deep's influence, creating enthusiastic cooperation in the process of one's own destruction. The relationship between the Deep and the original Abyss is complex and often misunderstood. While both represent manifestations of humanity's dark heritage, they are fundamentally different in nature and purpose. The Abyss retains its connection to the original Dark Soul and seeks to return humanity to its true nature, even if that process is chaotic and destructive. The Abyss retains its connection to the original Dark Soul and seeks to return humanity to its true nature, even if that process is chaotic and destructive. The Deep, by contrast, has been severed from its natural roots and seeks only to consume and corrupt. This distinction has profound implications for how these forces affect human beings. Exposure to the Abyss can transform humans, but the transformation maintains some connection to authentic human nature, even if that nature is revealed to be darker and more complex than previously understood. Exposure to the Deep, however, tends to diminish and corrupt human nature rather than revealing its deeper truths. The Deep's influence on religious institutions specifically reflects its corrupted nature. Where the Abyss tends to oppose divine authority directly, challenging artificial constraints placed on human nature, the Deep works through those same institutions, using their structure and authority to spread its corruption more effectively. This parasitic approach allows the Deep to achieve widespread influence while maintaining a facade of legitimacy. In the vast tapestry of Dark Souls lore, few figures are as enigmatic and influential as the Primordial Serpents. These ancient beings operate from the shadows of history, manipulating events and individuals across millennia, while pursuing goals that remain largely hidden from mortal understanding. To comprehend the true nature of the Abyss and its role in the cosmic order, one must first understand these serpentine manipulators who claim to serve humanity's interests while pursuing their own inscrutable agenda. The Primordial Serpents are among the oldest entities in the Dark Souls universe, possibly predating even the everlasting dragons whose stone scales once defined the nature of existence itself. Their origins remain shrouded in mystery, with various theories suggesting they might be imperfect dragons, failed experiments of the first flame, or something else entirely, beings from a realm beyond the normal concepts of light and dark that define most existence. What we know for certain is that there are at least 8 of these creatures, though only 2 have revealed themselves extensively to human observation, Kingseeker Frampt and Darkstalker Kathy. These 2 serve as the primary representatives of what appears to be a cosmic debate about the future of existence itself, a debate in which humanity serves as both prize and pawn. Frampt presents himself as an ally of the gods and supporter of the current cosmic order. He appears to chosen undead who have proven themselves worthy through great deeds, offering guidance that leads them toward the linking of the first flame and the continuation of the Age of Fire. His counsel emphasizes duty, sacrifice, and the maintenance of the established order, presenting the extension of Gwyn's age as not just desirable but necessary for the survival of civilization itself. Kathy, by contrast, emerges from the Abyss to offer an alternative vision. He reveals himself only to those who demonstrate independence and strength by defeating the 4 kings, without first accepting Frampt's guidance. Kathy speaks of humanity's true heritage, of the Dark Soul and the Furtive Pygmy, offering a path that leads not to the preservation of the current age, but to its deliberate ending and replacement. On the surface, this appears to be a simple conflict between opposing philosophies: order versus chaos, light versus dark, divine authority versus human independence. But the reality is far more complex and morally ambiguous than either serpent admits. Both Frampt and Kaith are manipulators who present carefully edited versions of the truth, emphasizing information that supports their position while concealing facts that might lead their chosen agents to different conclusions. Frampt's deception lies primarily in what he chooses not to reveal. He speaks eloquently of duty and sacrifice, but fails to mention that the sacrifice he requests is not temporary but eternal, that the chosen undead who links the fire will burn for ages as fuel for a flame that will inevitably fade regardless. He presents the linking as a heroic act of salvation, while concealing its nature as a temporary stopgap that merely postpones the inevitable transition to darkness. More significantly, Frampt conceals the artificial nature of the entire cosmic order he claims to represent. The Age of Fire was never meant to be eternal, and Gwyn's decision to link the flame was itself an act of defiance against natural law. Frampt's guidance leads heroes to perpetuate an unnatural state of existence, requiring increasingly desperate measures to maintain. Kathy's manipulation is more subtle but equally profound. While he tells more literal truth about humanity's origins and heritage, he presents a carefully curated version of what the Age of Dark would actually entail. He speaks of human lordship and the rightful inheritance of the Dark Soul, but says little about the chaos and suffering that would accompany such a dramatic transition. More troubling still is Kaith's role in engineering some of the very catastrophes he claims to oppose. His manipulation of the Oolacile sorcerers led directly to the awakening of Manus and the spread of the Abyss, creating precisely the kind of chaotic darkness that gives credence to Frampt's warnings about the dangers of ending the Age of Fire. Kathy's willingness to sacrifice entire kingdoms in pursuit of his goals raises serious questions about whether his vision of human lordship would be any more benevolent than the divine tyranny he seeks to replace. The relationship between Frampt and Kathy themselves is another source of mystery and speculation. Despite their apparent opposition, both serpents appear in the Dark Lord ending of the first game, suggesting that their conflict may be more theatrical than genuine. Some scholars theorize that they are working together, presenting false choices to ensure that regardless of which path humanity chooses, the outcome serves the serpent's true agenda. This possibility is supported by the serpent's behavior in later games, where their influence is felt but their direct presence is largely absent. If their conflict were genuine and the stakes as high as they claim, one would expect to see continued manipulation and interference as the cosmic drama unfolds. Instead, the serpents seem content to observe from the shadows, suggesting that the specific outcome matters less to them than the process of choice itself. The true nature of the serpent's agenda may relate to their status as beings who exist outside the normal cycle of fire and dark. Unlike gods who are empowered by the flame or humans who carry fragments of the dark soul, the serpents appear to derive their power from the very concept of disparity itself, the difference between opposing forces that gives meaning to existence. From this perspective, the serpent's manipulation serves not to advance either light or dark, but to maintain the tension between them. A world of pure light would be as sterile and unchanging as the grey realm that existed before the first flame. A world of pure darkness would collapse into the undifferentiated void that preceded disparity itself. Only through continued conflict between opposing forces can the serpents maintain their relevance and power. This interpretation explains many otherwise puzzling aspects of serpent behavior. Why would Cathy engineer catastrophes that discredit his own philosophy? Because the chaos creates opportunities for heroes to emerge and make meaningful choices. Why would Frampt conceal the true costs of linking the fire? Because knowledge of those costs might lead to despair or resignation rather than active engagement with the cosmic drama. The serpents, in this reading, are not advocates for particular outcomes but curators of eternal conflict. They ensure that neither light nor dark achieves permanent dominance, that the cycle of choice and consequence continues indefinitely. They are the embodiment of the principle that struggle gives life meaning, that existence without opposition becomes mere existence without purpose. This curatorial role explains the serpent's approach to individual humans and gods. They do not seek to control events directly, but to ensure that key individuals have access to the information and resources necessary to make consequential choices. They are not puppet masters but stage managers, setting up scenarios where free will can operate most dramatically. The selection criteria for serpent attention appears to be based not on moral worth or particular allegiances, but on capacity for significant action. Both Frampt and Cathy seek out individuals who have demonstrated exceptional ability, determination, and independence. They want agents who can genuinely change the course of history, not merely serve as instruments of predetermined plans. This preference for exceptional individuals reflects the serpent's understanding that meaningful choice requires meaningful consequences. A decision that affects only the chooser is a personal matter. A decision that shapes the fate of civilizations is a cosmic event worthy of serpentine attention. The serpents are drawn to moments and individuals where the weight of choice is greatest. The weapons and tools that the serpents provide to their chosen agents reflect this philosophy. Frampt offers practical assistance, the ability to break down titanite, transportation to key locations, and guidance toward objectives serving his stated agenda. But he does not provide overwhelming power or remove the challenges his agents must face. The path he offers is difficult and requires genuine commitment and sacrifice. Cathy provides different but equally balanced assistance. The red eye orbs he grants to Darkwraiths are powerful tools, but they require the user to actively seek out and defeat other humans to be effective. The knowledge he offers about humanity's heritage is transformative, but it comes with psychological costs and moral complications that each individual must navigate independently. Both serpents seem committed to ensuring that their agents must earn their power and prove their worthiness through action rather than simply receiving gifts that guarantee success. This approach suggests that the serpents value the process of growth and choice more than any particular outcome that process might produce. The cosmic scope of serpent influence becomes apparent when examining their involvement in events across multiple ages and kingdoms. References to serpentine manipulation appear in the histories of Lordran, Drangleic, and Lothric, suggesting that their activities span centuries or millennia. Yet their direct interventions are rare and carefully timed, appearing only at moments when the cosmic balance threatens to tip too far in one direction. This pattern of intermittent, but crucial intervention supports the theory that the serpents serve as cosmic correction mechanisms, appearing when necessary to restore balance, but otherwise allowing events to unfold according to their own internal logic. They are gardeners rather than architects, pruning and shaping growth, but not determining its fundamental nature. As we reach the end of our journey through the depths of the abyss and the dark corners of humanity's hidden heritage, we find ourselves confronting the same fundamental choice that faces every character in the Dark Souls universe: whether to accept the comfortable illusions that make existence bearable, or to embrace the difficult truths that make existence meaningful. The abyss, in all its manifestations, represents far more than simple destruction or corruption. It is the return of something that was always meant to be, the reassertion of humanity's true nature after centuries of artificial suppression and manipulation. The darkness that spreads from places like Oolacile and New Londo is not an invasion but a homecoming, not a curse but a revelation of what humans really are beneath the veneer of divine civilization. Yet this revelation comes at an enormous cost. The price of touching one's true nature, of acknowledging the dark soul that pulses within every human heart, is nothing less than the complete transformation of how one understands existence itself. Those who survive this transformation, who become Dark Lords rather than mere victims of the abyss, discover that power and knowledge bring responsibilities that few are prepared to bear. The Furtive Pygmy's original choice to divide the dark soul among countless offspring was both an act of love and an act of necessary restraint. They understood that the full power of primal darkness was too vast for any single consciousness to contain safely, that the only way to preserve their children's humanity was to limit their access to their own heritage. The tragedy of Manus represents what happens when this careful balance is disrupted, when the full force of the dark soul manifests without the wisdom and restraint that made the Pygmies' original sacrifice meaningful. The gods' response to humanity's dark potential, including the mechanisms that bind humanity, represents a different kind of choice. The exact origins of the undead curse remain mysterious, though many believe it to be connected to the dark sign that Gwyn placed upon humanity. Whether the curse was Gwyn's deliberate creation or an unintended consequence of his linking of the fire, its function is clear: to prevent humans from accessing the full power of their dark soul heritage, while providing renewable spiritual fuel for the flame. The Primordial Serpents, for all their manipulation and hidden agendas, understand something that both gods and humans often miss. That meaning emerges from choice, that choice requires genuine alternatives, and that alternatives must be preserved through constant vigilance against forces that would eliminate them. Their cosmic game, whatever its ultimate purpose, ensures that the fundamental questions about existence remain open, that each generation must confront these questions anew rather than simply accepting inherited answers. The Darkwraiths represent one possible response to the revelation of humanity's true nature: the embrace of power without moral constraint, the acceptance of predation as a natural and necessary part of existence. Their path offers genuine liberation from divine oppression, but at the cost of becoming something that most humans would consider monstrous. They prove that authenticity alone is not sufficient, that being true to one's nature can lead to destruction as easily as to enlightenment. The deep represents the opposite extreme, the corruption that results when natural impulses are acknowledged but not understood, when darkness is embraced without wisdom or restraint. The institutions that fell to deep influence demonstrate how even genuine spiritual seeking can become a path to exploitation and parasitism, when guided by incomplete understanding of human nature and cosmic principles. The knights and heroes who fall to the abyss, Artorias, the Four Kings, countless others, whose names have been forgotten, represent the tragic consequences of trying to serve two masters. Their dedication to divine authority prevented them from understanding and integrating their own dark heritage, making them vulnerable to corruption when they finally encountered it. Their stories serve as warnings about the dangers of absolute loyalty to any ideology, no matter how noble its stated purposes. Yet the very existence of the chosen undead and the possibility of the Dark Lord ending suggests that another path remains open. The individual who successfully navigates all these challenges, who can resist the corruption of the deep, survive exposure to the abyss, overcome the constraints of the undead curse, and see through the manipulations of gods and serpents alike, gains the opportunity to make choices that will shape the nature of existence for ages to come. This ultimate choice, whether to link the fire and perpetuate the current age or to let it die and usher in the age of dark, cannot be made based on simple moral calculations. Both options involve enormous costs and uncertain benefits. Linking the fire means accepting responsibility for maintaining an artificial order that causes genuine suffering, while embracing the dark means accepting responsibility for the chaos and transformation that will inevitably follow. The truth that the abyss ultimately reveals is that there are no perfect choices, no solutions that eliminate suffering or guarantee happiness for all. There are only decisions made by conscious beings who must take responsibility for their consequences, who must live with the knowledge that their actions will determine the fate of countless others who never had the opportunity to choose for themselves. This is perhaps the deepest horror and the greatest beauty of the Dark Souls universe. Its recognition that consciousness and choice are simultaneously the source of all meaning and the cause of all suffering. The gods sought to eliminate this terrible responsibility by creating systems that would make the important choices automatically, but their efforts only delayed the inevitable moment when someone would have to decide what existence itself should become. The abyss, in all its forms, serves as a constant reminder that this responsibility cannot be avoided indefinitely. It will always find ways to manifest, always seek opportunities to confront those who would deny its reality. The darkness within human souls will not remain hidden forever, and when it emerges, it will demand acknowledgement and integration. Those who seek to understand the abyss must therefore prepare themselves not just for intellectual comprehension but for existential transformation. The knowledge that comes from truly understanding humanity's dark heritage changes the one who possesses it, making it impossible to return to the comfortable illusions that sustain normal existence. This is why the serpents choose their agents so carefully, why the gods work so hard to keep these truths hidden, and why even exposure to the abyss can drive mortals to madness. Yet for those with the strength to bear this knowledge, the abyss offers something that no other force in the Dark Souls universe can provide: the possibility of authentic existence based on complete understanding of what one truly is. The Dark Lord who emerges from the trials of the abyss has seen through all illusions, overcome all artificial constraints, and accepted full responsibility for their own nature and choices. Whether such a being would prove to be humanity's savior or its destroyer ultimately depends on what they choose to do with their knowledge and power. The abyss itself is neutral, revealing truth without prejudging what should be done with that truth. It offers power without dictating how that power should be used. It provides freedom without guaranteeing that freedom will be used wisely. This neutrality is perhaps what makes the abyss so terrifying to those who prefer moral certainty. It refuses to provide easy answers or clear directions, instead demanding that each individual who encounters it make their own decisions about what existence should become. It is the ultimate expression of free will, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, offering both the possibility of transcendence and the risk of damnation. In the end, the story of the abyss is the story of humanity itself, a species that possesses the capacity for both creation and destruction, both love and hatred, both wisdom and folly. The darkness that lies at the heart of human nature is not separate from its capacity for light, but intimately connected to it. One cannot be truly human without acknowledging both aspects of this duality. The choice that faces every individual in the Dark Souls universe is not whether to be good or evil, light or dark, but whether to be authentic or false, conscious or unconscious, free or enslaved. The abyss offers the possibility of authenticity, consciousness, and freedom, but it cannot guarantee that these gifts will be used well. That determination must be made by each person who confronts their own dark heritage and decides what to do with the truth they discover there. The cosmic cycle will continue regardless of any individual choice. Ages will rise and fall, civilizations will flourish and decay, new forms of consciousness will emerge to grapple with the same eternal questions. Itriduscurus, civil avera, interfere for fears, the murmur spreaks and the vilni savor, will emerge to grapple with the same eternal questions. But the specific shape that future takes depends on the choices made by those rare individuals who achieve sufficient understanding and power to influence the course of existence itself. The abyss waits patiently for such individuals to emerge, offering them the knowledge and power they need to shape reality according to their vision. It makes no judgment about what that vision should be, asking only that those who would wield its power do so with full understanding of what they are and what they are choosing to become. This is humanity's dark secret and its greatest gift, the capacity to choose what existence itself becomes, to take responsibility for the shape of reality, to create meaning in a universe that offers no inherent purpose beyond what conscious beings decide to give it. The abyss is both the source of this terrible responsibility and the means by which it can be exercised. Whether humanity proves worthy of this gift remains to be seen. The choice is always before us, in every moment, in every decision, to embrace truth or flee from it, to accept responsibility or delegate it to others, to act with consciousness or drift through existence in comfortable unconsciousness. The abyss teaches us that there are no safe choices, no paths that guarantee good outcomes, no authorities that can make the difficult decisions for us. There is only the eternal confrontation between consciousness and unconsciousness, between authenticity and illusion, between the courage to become what we truly are, and the temptation to remain what others would have us be. This is the final lesson of the abyss. That meaning does not come from avoiding the darkness within ourselves, but from learning to integrate it wisely. That power is not evil in itself, but becomes evil when exercised without understanding or restraint, and that the greatest tragedy is not the corruption of human nature, but its suppression and denial. The Dark Lord's choice is ultimately everyone's choice, made again and again in countless small moments that collectively determine the shape of existence itself. Each time we choose consciousness over unconsciousness, truth over illusion, authentic engagement over comfortable detachment, we participate in the same cosmic decision that the greatest heroes and villains of Dark Souls must face. The abyss waits within each of us, patient and eternal, offering its gifts to those brave enough to descend into their own depths and face what they find there. It promises no easy answers, no comfortable certainties, no escape from the burden of choice, but it offers something far more valuable: the possibility of becoming truly human, fully conscious, completely free. This is humanity's dark secret and its greatest hope, that within the very darkness that seems to threaten our existence lies the key to our liberation, that the abyss we fear is also the source of our greatest potential, and that the choice to embrace or deny this truth remains eternally before us, waiting for those with the courage to make it. And so we conclude our deep dive into the abyss and humanity's darkest secrets. We have explored the origins of this primordial darkness in the Furtive Pygmy's sacrifice, witnessed its terrible manifestation in Manus and the fall of kingdoms, traced its corruption through the Darkwraiths and the deep, and confronted the cosmic choice that defines the very nature of existence itself. The legacy of the abyss continues to shape every corner of the Dark Souls universe, reminding us that the greatest truths are often the most difficult to face, and that authentic existence requires the courage to confront the darkness within ourselves. May this knowledge serve you well as you walk your own path through the dying embers of the Age of Fire, and may you find the wisdom to choose your destiny with full awareness of what you truly are. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of darkness. Until next time, may your rest be peaceful, and may your dreams be free from the encroaching abyss, or perhaps may you learn to embrace it